All right, folks, I want us to try something a little different here today. Because normally, of course, you come to conferences to learn how to do things better. But I think it would be more fun if we could talk about how to do things worse. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Before we jump in, let me give a quick introduction. My name is Kat. I'm a senior design and developer advocate at Progress Software, and I have spent my career focused on the front end. But not just front-end development, although I have done plenty of that. I actually started out over in the world of design. That's what I got my undergrad degree in. But it turns out it's actually really frustrating to not be able to make the stuff that you design. So I learned how to do that. I taught myself to code and then kind of found my niche in the world of component libraries and design systems, where design and development kind of overlap. And I said to myself, you know what? I think I've got too much time on my hands. I'm enjoying myself too much. I bet I could fix that by going to grad school. And I was right. About 6 months ago, I completed my master's in software systems design and engineering, which is all to say, I feel like I know my way around the front end pretty well at this point, from a design, UX, and development perspective. Now, they say that with great power comes great responsibility. But unfortunately, great responsibility is also extremely boring. Abusing your power is infinitely more fun. Now, as a developer advocate, I give a lot of conference talks. And usually they're about stuff like making good design choices or building user-friendly components. And frankly, it's all kind of starting to get a little bit dull. I'm ready to mix it up. Turn to the dark side. Step into the mirror universe. Give in to the dark urge. You can pick your favorite nerdy metaphor. Today, I want to talk about ruining user interfaces, because it is my official position that there are not enough conference talks that tell you how to do things worse. So let's fix that. But Kat, I can hear you saying, my user interfaces already suck. Wrong. Not as much as they could suck. You only kinda suck now, because you're making some small-time unintentional mistakes. You could be making big mistakes. You gotta think bigger. You gotta aim higher. Or should that be lower? It's not important. My point is, your bad UI right now is a novice-level bad UI. It's bad UI for babies. And after this talk, you're gonna be ready to really take it into the big leagues of making crap that really screws over your users. You will truly understand the underlying design and development concepts of what makes an interface bad, giving you the power to crank those things up to 11 and really mess up some interfaces. Or I guess, hypothetically, you could use that understanding to make better choices in your interface and hypothetically improve it? No, I'm sure I can trust you guys to only use these powers for evil. So get your villainous monologues ready, my friends, because it is time to screw over some users. Now, there are two main categories of the ways that we can mess up an interface: UX and UI. Naturally, these will overlap to a certain extent. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. At a very high level, the UX is going to focus more on the kind of user flows, information architecture, and general experience of using the app. The UI, on the other hand, is more focused on the visual design, the layout of elements on the page, your colors, your fonts, all that kind of stuff. But because they go hand in hand, we will need to consider both in order to achieve our goals. So let's start with the UX. Lesson 1, disconnected responses. Nobody expects a modal. That is what makes them so delightfully evil. Back in the early days of the web, we had pop-ups, separate little windows that would launch from your browser and completely disrupt your experience. Everyone hated them. It was fantastic. Unfortunately, they did hate them so much that pop-up blockers got built into just about every browser in existence. But evil, my friends, is nothing if not persistent. because we found a way to leverage all the perks of a pop-up, all the disruption, distraction, confusion, and build that directly into our web applications itself. Take that, browsers. Now, in order to use a modal to its fullest and most obnoxious potential, it should always appear without any kind of prompt from the user. Users are never really expecting them, as mentioned, but there are still ways to make them less surprising and disruptive, such as having a modal appear after a user clicks a button. In this case, we've kind of created a connection between the user input and the system response. The user maybe wasn't expecting a modal specifically, but they were still kind of expecting something to happen, so when this pops up, it doesn't throw them off too much. Now, obviously, that's not what we want. So we should instead opt for situations in which the modal appears without warning and not in direct response to anything that the user has done. This, of course, can be abstracted and applied beyond mere modals, because really our ultimate goal here is to create a world in which the user never has any idea what's happening behind the scenes and is always just kind of left vaguely confused about why things are happening on their screen. In fact, we can even flip this around, and it is just as effective. Let's say a user does click a button, this time to submit a form, but now nothing happens. No confirmation dialog, no loading spinner, no page redirection. Did it submit? Did the connection lapse? Did it time out? Should they click the submit button again? Should they click the submit button 18 more times? Would that break something? All the confusion. It is delightful. To be at our most evil, we should always ensure that there is a complete and total lack of user visibility into the system status, making sure that their actions and the interface responses feel completely and totally disconnected at all times. Lesson 2, clear as mud. Here's the thing. Users are so self-centered. They always expect things to be completely tailored to how they move through the world, right? Everything from icons to product names to the way that we describe things in our interface. But there's never any consideration for what would be easiest for us, the developers. You know, the most important people in this process. Honestly, it's disgusting. That being said, it is also something that we can take advantage of in our pursuit for bad UIs. Because the further we can distance our interfaces from the user's lived experience, the harder it is for them to use. They always want there to be a match between the system and the real world. I say, cry about it. Let's talk practical applications for a minute. One of the ways that we can really crank this up is to lean into vague language and really unhelpful icons. Oh, what's that icon with the 3 little overlapping stars? That's Glack, our AI chatbot. Come on, it says Glack right there. It seems pretty self-explanatory. Oh, how do you add a user profile? Well, you didn't sync the datasheet using the widget. It's right there in the description. It's like you didn't even see the CTA for the CMS FTP docs. What will happen when you click the button that says let's go? You will go, obviously. You want to know where? I say, where is your sense of adventure? Users want signs and labels and identifiable common symbols, all using the language and iconography that they're used to, that they already know from their day-to-day work. It's so demanding. And it's not super obvious, then they expect us to spell it out for them, using things like basic language and non-industry specific terms, as if it's somehow our responsibility to be conducting user research and gaining an understanding of the people using our applications. Human-centered design, you say? Well, I say, it's about time to decenter the user and recenter the developer. If it's good enough for me, it's good enough for them, right? After all, am I not also a user? Lesson 3, high stakes. Users are not going to get everything right the first time. In fact, much like this, in which I had to change laptops at the last minute, so my GIFs are not working, errors will happen. No matter how wonderful or intuitive our user interface is, there will be folks who make mistakes and forget things or go back or have to undo an action. So I say, why bother making the interface good in the first place, right? That's just wasted effort. Let's make it worse. Part of what makes users feel comfortable and engaged with a piece of software is the knowledge that they can freely experiment and know that the stakes are low. They want the consequences for simple actions to be minimal. Your clicks can be unclicked, your navigation moves backwards and forwards without getting lost, your choices aren't permanent. Oh, you changed the color to red, but you didn't like that? That's okay, you can just click undo. Well, guess what, chumps? That's not the way the world works. It is harsh and unforgiving out there, and I don't see why my software is supposed to be any different. You want safe exploration. You want a low-stakes environment where you can learn the interface and figure out the functions without making permanent or difficult-to-reverse changes. Well, I say, grow up. Actions have consequences. You don't just get to move through my interface, clicking whatever you like, blundering through the pages like some kind of animal. Have a little decorum, for God's sake. This goes double for situations where users do actually need to make important permanent decisions, things like placing an order or deleting an account. Those stakes are already high and users are already a little nervous. So let's turn up the heat. I want them to feel actual fear before they click a submit button, knowing that this is permanent, binding, contractual action with absolutely no takesy-backsies. In these kinds of situations, users want to know at which point there is no turning back and what exactly will happen afterwards, which means that that is exactly the kind of information we want to obscure. Keep them guessing on which step is going to tip them over into that final irreversible commitment, and make sure you have removed any escape hatches or ways back out of the process. Once a user starts down a path on our interface, we can make it infinitely worse by ensuring that the stakes feel high and there is no easy way out. Make every choice feel dangerous and permanent. Make every click a promise. Oh, you were just browsing, you didn't want to buy this? Sounds like commitment issues to me, buddy. Maybe you're just not taking this seriously enough. Users need to understand, web browsing isn't supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be anxiety-inducing and frustrating. Lesson 4, consistency and standards. Now, before we can get into this one, there is a term that we have to define first, and that is mental model. A user's mental model is the understanding they build and the assumptions that they make about their current experience, based on the similar experiences that they have had up until this point. So, for example, right, most websites have that logo in the top left corner, and that will take the user back to the home page when clicked. So, when they click it, that's where they expect to go. Similarly, right, linked text in a web page is always underlined. We know that right-clicking always opens a contextual action menu. As people use technology over the course of their entire lives, they start to pick these things up and kind of integrate them into their high-level understanding of just how things work. This gives us an excellent opportunity to mess with them by creating something terrible. Because when those expected things don't happen, or worse, when something completely new and surprising happens instead, it will throw off your users like nobody's business. Those carefully crafted mental models no longer line up. They're useless. Now they both have to learn our new system and remember later that the system is different for our particular piece of website or software. This increases the user's cognitive load, or the amount of mental effort and energy that it takes to complete a task. If we were to just meet the wider standards of web and application design, we would be allowing our users to just carry over everything they've already learned, all the behaviors that have become second nature to them through years and years of tech use. And that simply will not do. I, for one, am tired of interfaces that just work. Because we're not forcing our users to go against the grain and to learn something new in order to use our product. Our product is special. It is unique, and it deserves to be treated as such. If a user cannot be bothered to learn a whole new set of interactions and gestures and patterns just to use our software, then do they even really care? Because it sounds to me like they just don't want it badly enough. If it was truly important to them, they would work harder, right? It's also important to note that this applies to both the user's wider experience using the web and software in general, as well as pages within a single website, applications that are linked in a suite, or other kinds of connected digital experiences. That's because mental models can also be constructed on a product-by-product basis. So, for example, let's say we have one app that's in a suite of connected applications, and they all use a specific color system to designate different types of information. Maybe we have navigation menus that are always organized in a certain way. Maybe we have program-specific keyboard shortcuts. All we have to do to really throw users off is make those different between the various applications in our suite. For example, have you ever tried to use the keyboard shortcuts in the Adobe Creative Suite? Somebody has. Because that is truly some of the finest work I have ever seen in the realm of inconsistency, an evil masterclass that each and every one of us could be learning from. The more changes we make from the norm, the more we can disrupt our users' mental models and create a higher cognitive load for those users that do have to switch back and forth between the systems regularly. It may seem simple, but it is, in fact, truly devious. Lesson 5, errors. Now, a beginner in UI ruining may simply tell you that you need to make the software buggier. You need to add more errors in. But really, that's just child's play. A true professional knows that you don't need to add more errors. You just need to increase the potential for your current errors. You gotta be working smarter, not harder. After all, as we already discussed with my Infomatic GIFs that don't work, user error is inevitable. Whether it's a system bug, a user mistake, or some combination, that's already built in. So how can we increase the likelihood of these errors happening? By making poor choices during the design and development process. For example, we know users that are on a mobile device are more likely to misclick or fat finger things, right? Especially if we're working in a really small, really compact page layout. We can help increase the chances of that error happening by making the clickable areas or target sizes even smaller and less forgiving. We can also be intentionally devious about where we're placing interactive elements on the page and how much empty space we're building in around them. So for example, I love to put my buttons all the way on the right-hand side of the screen, so when the user's scrolling with their thumb, they will accidentally click as many things as possible. Get everything as tightly packed as possible, and you can really start to make misclicks unavoidable. And remember, all of these lessons don't just work in isolation. In fact, they are much more powerful when you combine them. So when a user does inevitably make that misclick, that's when we're going to go back and reference lesson 3, high stakes, and make it as difficult as possible for them to go back or undo whatever their unintentional action actually did. By combining these two approaches, we have created something far more evil than we could have by using just one. Lesson 6, challenge their memory. Now, users have a lot going on, and software is a comparatively small part of that. Schedules and grocery lists and work to-dos, personal tasks, the details of our particular user interface tend to be pretty low on their priority list. Now, as someone uses that interface more often, it's going to start to stick in their memory, but that will take time. Generally, designers try to reduce the amount of time that it takes to learn an interface and lost my place there. And reduce the amount of effort that it takes for them to get used to using the UI based on the assumption that they will not remember it. But I say users are the ones that are supposed to be making an effort here, right? Because if something is important to you, you go out of your way to remember it. Our users do it all the time. They have anniversaries and birthdays. I don't see why my application is any less important than their wedding anniversary. Now, to lean into the evil impulse here, we are going to want to be sure that we have created a situation where the user has to recall all those intricate details of our interface, rather than us just surfacing that relevant information as it's needed in the context of the task. A classic way to do this, and one that you might actually already be taking advantage of, is unlabeled icons. Users are so used to unlabeled icons, they're not even going to blink at this. But in fact, it is a fantastic way to create that extra mental work by placing the burden on them to remember what they all mean. And sure, that burden might be kind of low for common icons, right? A house to take you back home, a gear for settings. But we also have the opportunity here to make it much more difficult. Does a light bulb mean see a tip or toggle on light mode? Just take a look at these beauties. I bet you can imagine at least 2 to 3 different possible interpretations for each one. Some because they are truly bizarre and incomprehensible, and others because they are so generic they could mean just about anything. And again, we can start to combine these for maximum efficiency here, right? So remember when we talked about mental models back in lesson 4, how users are making assumptions about various elements on our websites or apps based on how other websites and apps behave? This is a great chance to subvert those expectations. Because your users may think that they know that a gear icon means settings, but what if it doesn't? What if it takes you to widgets or just somewhere else entirely? After a while, you will eventually train your established users in the behavior for long enough that it sticks, maybe even starts to make some kind of bizarre sense to them, kind of a Stockholm Syndrome situation. But your new users are always going to have to rack their brains to remember over and over again until it sticks. And if you ever feel like your users are getting too comfortable and they've figured it out too well, that's the perfect time for a redesign. Lesson 7, my way or the highway. You ever tried to plan a group vacation for like 4 or more people? It's a nightmare. Everyone has different needs and preferences. They want something different from the trip. They think different things are fun. One person thinks spending the whole day in an art museum sounds like heaven, and another can't imagine why we just spent 8 hours in a plane to stay inside all day. It's enough to make you never want to leave the house again. Building a user interface is a lot like this, because we are expected to accommodate all sorts of different users. New users want to be handheld through everything. Experienced users want us to shut up and get out of their way. Some people will only pay for your software in order to use one specific feature that they need in their daily work. Others have not opened the page for that feature even once. And of course, we are the ones expected to build a variety of flexible paths and processes into our UI so that users of all different experiences and capabilities can feel comfortable using our process. It is exhausting. I say, screw that. We can save ourselves a ton of work and make our interfaces so much worse by simply building one user flow and saying, take it or leave it. Consider a situation where a user is filling out a long form. A new user might work their way through that form slowly, right? They're going to click on each input box with their mouse. They're going to think about their response. They're going to type it out. An experienced user who has filled out this form 100 million times, approximately, is going to tab between all those interface boxes. They might even copy-paste content. They're probably not going to touch the mouse at all. A visually impaired person, on the other hand, might make use of a screen reader in combination with their keyboard or another kind of adaptive input tool in order to fill out this form. Now, if we had built this form to be flexible, all 3 of our hypothetical users here are going to be able to complete it in their preferred way with their preferred tools. That is entirely too functional and adaptable for our purposes. Another good example here might be 2 users who use the same feature in different ways. I know some folks that like to organize all of their files within a file manager just so, right? They have their named folders and subfolders. They've created a process and a hierarchy that makes sense to them. I know other people that will always click to recently opened and open the last thing that they worked on, or they will use the search bar exclusively and they have no idea where any individual file is actually saved. Now, a more kind-hearted developer might say, both ways are valid, right? But we know that that's not true. There's a correct answer here. The answer is that whatever way you prefer to do things is the correct way. Anyone else can get on board or hit the bricks. Lesson 8, Unsolvable errors. As previously established, errors will happen. And I gotta tell you, this repeating joke only gets funnier now that it doesn't work. They are unpreventable. Now, back in lesson 5, we talked about how to maximize the chances that your users will make errors. So now, let's talk about what we can do to make their experience as bad as possible once they have made that error. Because when an error occurs, users want to correct it. And if they're given an explanation of what happened, why it happened, and what the next step is, the worst news is they often can fix it. Generally, this is kind of broken down into 3 stages: recognition, diagnosis, and recovery. By obscuring each of these as much as possible, we can make sure that our users get trapped in their errors with no easy way forward, a clear recipe for anger and upset. Recognizing an error means that the user knows the error even happened in the first place. Now, that might seem like something we can't actually control, and in some cases that is true, right? Some errors are just going to be immediate and obvious. But remember that there are other errors that happen on the system side, right? There are bugs and unexpected inputs and connection failures, things that might not be related to a user's actions at all. Many times, those errors are going to happen completely behind the scenes, but they will still have implications for the user experience. That could be anything from longer than expected loading screens to a full crash of the software. Regardless of how the error came to be, we need to ensure that our user is left completely in the dark. This harkens back to lesson 1 as well, right? Disconnected responses. Why did everything freeze? Was it a freak accident? Was it something they did? Without any kind of communication from us on our side with the software, our users are never going to know. So that means no error messages, no input validations, no notifications. Without any of that information, the user's only option is to try and repeat the action over and over, hoping to connect the dots on their own, something that may or may not even actually be possible, depending on the error. Diagnosing an error means the user knows why the error occurred. And again, this could be due to their mistake, right? It could be a form validation error. It could be a system error. But we can always double down here and completely avoid sharing this information with them. That is, however, kind of the easy way out. To really increase their misery, we should offer them information that is, in fact, incomprehensible. This has the lovely benefit of making the user feel foolish or embarrassed for not understanding what the error means. So try serving them an error that is highly technical, that uses terms or codes that won't be meaningful to them whatsoever. This is a huge time waster for your users, right? Because if they had no information at all, they might just give up. But if we give them just a little bit of obscured information, we can send them on an hours-long rabbit hole while they attempt to figure out what happened. Now, this used to be efficient back when the only way they had to do this was to just Google things infinitely and end up on page 20. But I'm here to tell you, this is even eviler now in the age of AI. Because ChatGPT will never admit that it does not know what's happening. It will just keep feeding them things to try forever and ever and ever. Thank you to the evilest thing I can imagine. Finally, recovering from errors means that a user knows what they are supposed to do next. This could simply be an acknowledgement that the error happened, some kind of confirmation from the software side that no action is needed from the user. Maybe it's a prompt for them to try the action again, resubmit. Or possibly it's instructions on how they need to revise what they were doing. It could even just be the right language for them to open an IT ticket and describe their issues to a help desk, right? But no matter what the ideal follow-up action is, we need to not tell them, everything is fine, don't worry about it. Leave them hanging, unsure of how to resolve the problem, and relish in the feeling of complete helplessness that follows. Now, lesson 9, a lack of external resources, is ironically a final UX thing to ruin our UIs that does not involve our interface at all. Users really go on and on, right, about how products should be intuitive. that the UIs we create should always be so perfectly crystal clear to them on first glance they can just look at it and understand exactly what's supposed to happen and what they need to do and everything about the software. But come on, that's just not realistic. Sometimes the systems that we are building are by nature complex systems that are meant to solve complex problems. Things like advanced video or photo editing software, applications for banking or money management, specialized healthcare websites, right? Some things are just not going to be simple enough that you can glance and understand them. And if we are layering our horrific user interfaces on top of that, these users do not have a chance in hell of understanding what they are supposed to do. Now, as mentioned in the last lesson, right, when users get that completely lost, they tend to look for external guidance and instruction. Often, again, this looks like Googling or visiting a support center, reading the documentation. But if we really want to put the crap cherry on top of our awful UI cake, one of the best things we can do is to think beyond the software and ruin all of these resources as well. Again, the easy way out, right, is to just not provide them. No help desk, no FAQ, no onboarding tutorial, just complete and total lack of help. But again, if we want to be as evil as humanly possible, we can provide these resources, but make them in fact just as confusing and frustrating as the interface itself. You ever tried to assemble IKEA furniture? That's the feeling that we're going for here. We want to create the kind of instructions that make you feel like you maybe actually could have done better with no instructions at all. From a practical standpoint, right, you can try common tactics here like inaccurate searching, poorly organized content, overly technical language, complex steps that users have to follow extremely precisely in order to achieve their tasks. As long as we dangle the possibility of a solution in front of them, we can waste hours and hours and hours of their time while also making them feel ignorant and increasingly frustrated for not being able to follow our basic instructions. Now, thus far we have focused a lot on the user's interactions and experiences with our interface. So we're going to switch it up a little bit now and look over at the UI design choices we can make in order to create interfaces that are truly punishing to use. Starting with lesson 1, maximalism. Because you know what rules? Having a bunch of stuff. Like so much stuff. Just being a total magpie of stuff and surrounding ourselves with shiny objects and bright colors. Cramming as many things as we possibly can into the space around us. I think it's an approach that we can carry over into our interface designs. Don't you agree? These kind of simple, pared down, minimalist designs are so yesterday. You cannot, in full honesty, look me in the eyes and tell me you don't die a little bit inside every time a client asks you to make something that looks like the Apple website. I mean, come on. There's this philosophy out there that suggests that every element we put into our layouts should be there for a specific reason. That we should be approaching the elements in our user interfaces with curiosity, right? What purpose is this serving? Is this making the website or application a better place for the user? If not, could we remove it? But come on, man. I'm a developer, I'm not a monk. And if I think it's cool, I should be allowed to put it on the page. And if it makes that page a little bit more confusing or visually overwhelming or generally worse, all the better. Now, when we have too many items on one page, it becomes a little distracting. It starts to feel more challenging for the user to parse what is actually needed versus what isn't in order for them to complete their task. Another great thing that we can abuse here is the concept of white space. White space is the space in between all the other elements in your layout. Now, some total losers out there will tell you that you need a lot of white space in order to give the viewer's eyes a place to rest, give their minds a chance to process what they're seeing. But removing as much white space as possible from our layouts lets us turn them into a full-fledged sensory nightmare. Lesson 2, keep it moving. Ready to see another slide that's not going to work? Let's bring motion into the picture, or, don't. Animations, GIFs, and auto-playing videos can very quickly turn our websites into a truly miserable experience. You ever had 50 tabs open and you're not sure which one is playing music? That's peak evil, and that is a high that each and every one of us should be chasing every day in our own work. Animations and motion are great ways to draw attention to an element because our eyes are automatically going to seek out that source of the movement. And when there's just one thing that's moving on the page, it tends to be the first thing that we look at, which is all well and good if you're trying to create some kind of intentional experience for your users in which they're guided from element to element in order of importance. But thankfully, we're not bothering with that crap. Not to mention, once you bring all of this moving stuff into your product, it has the benefit of turning it into a complete accessibility nightmare as well. Big, fast-moving transitional animations can make your users sick to their stomach. Flashing lights could trigger migraines or even seizures. And auto-playing media means your visual or hearing-impaired users could miss whole swaths of content without ever knowing it. And if you're looking to be as evil as humanly possible, have it autoplay with the volume on so that it overlaps with their screen readers for a truly indecipherable web browsing experience. Lesson 3. No order in the court. There are some great tools that we have here in our tool belt when it comes to ordering elements on a page in a way that confuses and befuddles our users. That's because we actually have quite a bit of research on how our eyes skim over a page and how our brains naturally want to kind of group and organize disparate elements. When we look at a design, we automatically attempt to kind of sort the elements on the page into an order that allows us to digest the content. When we've created a layout that doesn't look good, it's often because we're kind of unintentionally working against these organizational methods. So in order to create something intentionally awful, we can start working against them. If you're interested in doing a little bit more reading, these core principles are known as the Gestalt principles, and they will give you all kinds of specific information on how our eyes move through a layout, what we consider grouped versus separate, and all sorts of other things. For right now, though, I'm just going to talk about a design foundation which leverages them, and you can take my word that this is all a real thing that exists and not something I made up in an attempt to fill slides. That foundation is visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy is the practice of creating contrast in your design by combining the use of size, placement, and color to manipulate what's called the visual weight of each element. Generally, designers want to use this to help their most important elements stand out, right? Things like big, informative headlines at the top or differently colored buttons that they want to make sure users click. But what they won't tell you is that you can use this stuff to make any random element on your page stand out. For better or worse, there is no design police. Visual hierarchy works by picking a size, color, or placement for an element that is going to be drastically different from all the other things on the page. For example, if you have a bunch of small words on a page and one big word, your eyes will notice the big word first. If you have a bunch of black text, but one word is in color, your eyes are going to snag on the colored word first. If you have a bunch of text on one side of the page and one word on the right, you guessed it, that's where your eyes are going first. And again, we can combine these to draw more attention to, let's say, a large red word not placed near anything else. When you're working with a real layout that has more going on than these simple examples here, it is often a requirement to kind of leverage multiple approaches at once to create an element that is actually eye-catching. So there are kind of two main ways we can abuse this, right? We can emphasize the wrong things, or we can not emphasize anything at all. And honestly, both are pretty darn effective. When we emphasize the wrong things, we can craftily draw our users' attention to things that will not help them complete their goals. Oh, you were looking for the submit button? Don't worry about it. May I direct your attention to the throw everything away and start over button. If we are especially clever about how we do this, we can even make them click on the wrong thing accidentally and do stuff like delete their work or send a file before it was done. And remember, you can combine this with earlier lessons, like making sure they can't undo anything, to truly amplify the screwing over. Now, it's worth noting here, I am not the originator of this kind of deception, much as I would be, I would love to be able to claim it for myself. When an interface has been created in such a way to intentionally trick the user into doing something, it's called a dark pattern. This includes things like copy that guilts users when they try to unsubscribe, intentionally confusing or ambiguous labels, or making it 1 step to sign up, but 20 steps to delete your account. Truly, we are standing on the shoulders of giants here. But back to the hierarchy thing. The other way we can use this for evil, as mentioned, is to not make anything at all stand out on the page. When the next step is lost in a sea of visually identical elements, it can be pretty much impossible for a user to figure out what they're supposed to be doing, where they're supposed to be looking, or how to move forward. Monochrome designs, where you only use one color for everything, are great for this. Same goes for font sizes, right? It's natural for us to want to make headers bigger than body text. We might never have actually thought about why, but generally it's because that means the headers get read first. When we take that size distinction away, it becomes a total free-for-all on the user's attention. And of course, we tend to organize things top down, right? The most important stuff gets put up at the top of the page, kind of like a newspaper. So why not try throwing your users for a loop by putting the important stuff all the way down to the bottom? Make them really search and scroll for it, like a little scavenger hunt. It's fun for everyone. Finally, lesson 4. Typography is a pretty complex topic. Some people even spend their entire careers designing and setting type, which is unhinged behavior, honestly. Typography is important to us in 2 main ways here: legibility and emotional match. Obviously, we want neither of these things in our designs, so let's figure out how to avoid them. Legibility is how easily read your type is. As a rule of thumb, type that is large, bold, and minimally decorated is going to be easier to read, which means, of course, we want type that is small and thin and highly decorative, with lots of silly little flourishes and loops. The size part here is what has the most effect. However, even an extremely lightweight and embellished font will eventually end up readable if you make it big enough. And a simple and well-designed font will eventually get challenging if you make it small enough. And of course, all of this is assuming that your users have perfect 20/20 vision, which I can assure you, they do not. Emotional match is a little bit harder to pinpoint here because it's less scientific, right? It has more to do with how a given font makes you feel and what it reminds you of. A font that has been designed to be playful and silly, like our favorite, Comic Sans, is going to feel drastically out of place when used on something important, like your funeral home website. Meanwhile, if your children's television network website is set in something very formal and structured, it will also feel off. Now, as mentioned, this is not quite as quantifiable as some of the earlier stuff. It takes a little bit of introspection and thoughtfulness. When you're trying to pick the worst possible font for your use case, consider the following. What's the primary message you want to communicate with this design? How do you want the user to feel when they're on your website? Presumably, right, scared, upset, sad, lost. Look at various fonts and consider what they remind you of, and then try to pick ones that align with what you want the user to be reminded of on your site. Next, are you presenting yourself as an authority or a friend? Serifs, the ones that have the kind of small decorative lines on the characters, are going to naturally convey knowledge, education, tradition, authority. That's why we often see them used for things like banks or law firms. So to achieve the highest level of mismatch, we want to flip that script and use those for frivolous things, and vice versa. All right, enough talk. Time for action. Now that you have these crucial lessons in evil interface creation, how are you supposed to use them? Well, a great way to leverage it is to think of this as a kind of checklist. Go through each one and make sure make sure you are doing each one. While it's always ideal to torture users directly in order to get their feedback, we can often catch a lot of the things that might be working a little too well by using these approaches to evaluate the product we have created by ourselves first. This will also save you time and money, right? Usability testing takes a lot of organization and effort, so you don't want to waste that catching your obvious mistakes. By using these lessons to make sure you have already checked the low-level boxes, you can concentrate your user interviews on higher level, more contextual and insightful feedback for worsening your product. Try using this list as a basis for your first internal review. You'll be surprised how much you're able to ruin the user interface before a user even touches it. Now, thank you very much for listening, and best or worst of luck with your designs.